Hi everyone, welcome to financialexpress.com special coverage on Indian Railways. The national transporter is the lifeline of the country, and under the current government there is increased focus on revenue generation. An encouraging sign, revenue from both passenger and freight segments has grown in the ongoing financial year. But that's not the only good news. There are a number of game-changing moves that are lined up by Indian Railways in the coming years. And to understand better what they are, we have with us Mohd Jamshed. He is Member Traffic at Railway Board. Hi sir.
Hi.
Sir, to give us a better sense, do you expect to meet your revenue targets for this current fiscal, and what is the big theme for the next financial year before the dedicated freight corridors roll in?
As we all understand, there are three major segments of Indian Railways revenue generation.
Right.
One is the freight revenues,
right.
passenger revenues, and another group of revenues that we call, which is a negligible amount, but we call them a non-fare revenue.
Okay.
Normally around 63% or so it comes from my freight revenues.
Right.
Remaining around 28% from passenger revenues, and whatever is left in terms of the leasing and advertisement, this is what we call non-fare revenues.
Right.
Indian Railways has been over a period of time losing its share in both the freight segment and also in the passenger segment.
Right.
What has been happening is that in the overall overall transportation growth in the country, and there are various kinds of modes which are growing at the same pace.
Right.
So we have been in very, very stiff competition.
Right.
And this stiff competition required a lot of investments in the infrastructure in terms of growing its capacity. And that is something that did not happen for many decades. I mean, there was a kind of a decadal negligence, if I may call it, last 2-3 decades, that the right kind of investments in the railways in terms of generating more capacity were not made.
Right.
The result was that we reached a stage of saturation where most of our sections, most of our busy routes are now totally saturated. It is very difficult to run additional traffic on the same lines.
Right.
There are busy lines where I needed not only these two lines, but sometimes they were single lines, they need to be doubled. The double lines need to be provided with a third line and a fourth line and a dedicated freight corridor. Now all this has been reversed. I mean, this has been ceased. In last about 2 years' time, we have seen that a certain plan was made that how Indian Railways can achieve the same growth, around 10% or plus something, and regain the traffic that has already been lost back to it. So we started working towards that, and as you are aware that in 3 years back, in 2015, it was announced that about 8,56,000 crores would be invested in terms of for growth in the infrastructure on Indian Railways.
Right.
And this was not only for the fixed infrastructure, but also with the rolling stock coming in. We have started seeing the results. In the meanwhile, during the interim period, we also needed our revenue sources to grow. And as you have rightly asked that whether we will be able to achieve the targets which we have set for ourselves, there are two kinds of targets. One we set for ourselves are the physical targets in terms of not only the capacity and augmentation, completion of projects, but also in terms of the revenues generating out of the freight traffic and the passenger traffic. I am very happy to tell you that the decisions taken, the initiatives taken, the reform agenda that we have followed for the last 2 years have started generating adequate demand in the sector.
Right.
And a very robust demand has been generated for rail transportation on the freight side to begin with. And on the freight side, I can tell you that up till now, up till about December, our tentative approximate figures are that we have done far better than last year, and the revenue growth itself is about 8% plus, which translates into almost about 7,000 crores additional revenue that we have generated during this year.
Okay.
At the same time, the good news is about the passenger revenue targets. Passenger revenue targets we also give ourselves, and there has been no fare hike.
Right.
And despite that, with all kinds of efforts that we have made with the IT interventions and with providing special services and new brands of trains, we have been able to generate additional revenue to the extent of roughly around 1,800 crores during April to December this year.
Okay.
So we are moving in the right direction, and we are gaining whatever we have been targeting.
Right.
And we have yet to see, there are 3 more months to go, the last quarter.
That's great. So have you been able to arrest this trend of losing out to railway, roadways or airlines that you just mentioned? Do you think that people will now come back to railways? Are you offering the right kind of services?
Oh yes, I mean if I talk about the passenger traffic segment, then in passenger traffic segment from 2011-12 onwards up to 2010 was a very minimal growth of passenger traffic. After that, the number of passengers from 2011-12 and up to about 2014-15, there was a consistent decline in the number of passengers.
Right.
To the extent of about 2% to 1%. And on Indian Railways, where I run almost about 2.3 crore passengers every day, this 1% and 2% is a very, very large number. Last year, by putting all the new policies in position and by taking a large number of steps, we have not only been able to stop this decline, but also reverse the trend.
Right.
And in April and December this year, the approximate figures are that we are almost about 1% in terms of numbers of passengers up. I mean, this would mean that, the regaining of confidence in Indian Railways by the public at large, which has resulted in roughly around 6 crore additional passengers coming to railways this year compared with last year itself.
Right.
So we are moving in this, not only, as I said, stopping the decline, but also moving upwards on the growing path. Our suburban traffic has given a very robust growth of about 2%.
Right.
Our reserved sector, and which gives me almost about 60% of my passenger revenues, has grown by about 6%. So these are very significant growths.
Right.
On the freight side, if I'll tell you that when we, on one side, we plan to invest more and more money for developing the infrastructure in terms of doubling the third line, dedicated freight corridor, and wherever we needed signaling improvements and traffic facility works for debottlenecking and decongesting the sections. All those actions have been taken, but these are slightly long gestation periods because they will continue to come every year by year and year.
Right.
And finally, with the dedicated freight corridor coming, that I will be perhaps talking a little later, by about 2020. During this period, we thought that we have to continue to gain more traffic.
Right.
So what can be done? Because the physical infrastructure not being there.
Right. And
this will take some time. There's a period. So we started putting in a certain kind of policies in position. And we realized that it is not viable at this point of time and not good for the railways to hike the freight rates.
Right.
We have to be extremely competitive, especially with the roadways, the civil aviation, the coastal shipping, and also inland waterways.
Right.
So we put about 15 such policies in place about 1.5 years back with the new government. And in this, we reduced the freight rates. We reduced 15% of the port congestion charges, for example. We eliminated the policy of dual pricing on iron ore.
Right.
We provided concessions to the extent of about 30% on freight loading in the empty direction. When the wagons go in loaded direction in one side and on the empty side it has to come back to the collieries, for example, on the coal side. We have put all these things in position. The result is that we have been able to gain traffic from every sector. We also, for the first time in the history, entered into long-term traffic contracts with our major stakeholders. And that also gave very rich dividends. Today we have a very robust demand for rail transportation. And I can see that in coal, in the food grain movement, in container movement, in iron ore movement, in steel movement, in raw material to steel plants and POL movement. In practically every segment other than fertilizer, we have grown anything between 2% to almost about 12% this year during this period in terms of millions of tons. And fertilizer, because of certain imports which were coming last year, they did not come this year. So therefore there is a marginal decline there.
Right. So as you yourself pointed out, there has been a growth in the coal traffic, even your iron ore and steel. But what does it mean in terms of revenue generation for Indian Railways? How much has that led to? Is it along expected lines?
Yeah, absolutely. This is along expected lines. I mean, these are the things when we put the policies in position, then there is a certain kind of a gestation period. I mean, for example, I'll tell you that if the long-term traffic agreements are there and we have provided certain concessions on the freight side and there is a cement sector, for example. Now, the cement sector will take some time to get out of their previous contracts with the road transportation and get back to the railway, then settle it down. So there is a gestation period.
Right.
So we are in any case having the same kind of a growth, and the revenue generation on the freight side up to between April and December has been to the extent of 81,000 crores plus, compared with roughly around 74 to 75,000 crores last year.
Right. So, and you expect that all these steps you have taken, especially in terms of long-term contract, they will yield results in the upcoming financial year still, obviously the dedicated freight corridors?
Oh, very much. We have a system called Samvad, where we keep on interacting with all our major stakeholders on a bi-monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, even at my level in Railway Board and also on the zonal railways. We have also appointed commodity-specific nodal points, and we keep on getting their feedback. I mean, today, the last meeting that I held with the industry was that the indications are that in practically every sector there is a very robust demand for rail transportation with all these measures that we have already taken. And today we are also getting into the mode of having more capacity and in terms of completion of certain doubling projects, in terms of getting the additional rolling stock and the new rolling stock. We have put policies for investment in the wagon sector for specialized wagons. So we are seeing that people have interest even investing in terms of bringing their own rakes to the railways for moving specialized kind of cargo in terms of steel and loose cement, etc.
Okay. So what is the multiplier effect that you expect from the dedicated freight corridor, both in terms of the fact that you will have additional lines to run your freight traffic and the fact that the existing passenger lines will be free for that kind of traffic, so there will be less saturation on the existing lines. So what is the multiplier effect?
That's a very good question, because this is something, this is going to have a paradigm change, the dedicated freight corridor. Although dedicated freight corridors are coming only in two sectors today, alongside the busiest routes that we have, that is the eastern sector and the western sector. We call it Eastern Dedicated Freight Corridor and the Western Dedicated Freight Corridor. But these are going to be very different from the normal track structure. Their track structure is fit for very heavy haul trains, long haul trains. So for a freight train, today if I run about 4 freight trains, container trains between JNPT and Delhi, Delhi and JNPT, that is the western route in fact, which is very, very heavily patronized by container traffic. I'll be only running one train which will be double the length, almost 1.5 kilometer long, and it will also be double stack. So 4 trains into one. You can imagine not only in terms of saving the capacity, and this will be out of the main regular corridor that we have, existing corridor. At the same time, unit cost of operation will go down significantly. And this unit cost of operation will be passed on to the customer. And therefore, if there is a confirmed and guaranteed delivery of consignment to the port in the shortest possible time and in bulk, this is going to bring about a sea change in the way the North India hinterland containerized cargo is to move towards the ports in Gujarat and on the western ports.
Do you see freight rates then further coming down? Will you be able to make it even more competitive then?
Yeah, we are already working on a business plan, what the dedicated freight corridor business plan would be like. But I'm sure that once this unit cost of operation goes down, obviously the freight rates will also further go down on those corridors. And these corridors will then release the capacity on the existing corridors. On the eastern side, today I am running about 90 to 100 trains each way between, I'll give you an example, between Delhi and Mughalsarai. Heavily congested route. About 50 are passenger carrying trains and roughly around 40 to 45 are the freight trains. Now these 40 to 45 trains which are basically carrying coal, most of them are carrying coal from the eastern sector to the northern sector and bringing the empty rakes back. I mean, this is a hugely problematic area today in terms of the saturation of capacity. Now this goods traffic moving on to the dedicated freight corridor would be more efficient, would be faster, more reliable. At the same time, the capacity that will be generated here will enable me to run more and more passenger trains, better kind of trains, more efficiently, more punctually, and also at a higher speed.
Which is key, of course.
Which is the key, that's right. So these are the two, as I said, dedicated freight corridors, but we are looking at the possibility of at least 3 more dedicated freight corridors alongside all our golden quadrilateral and diagonals, which carry about 60% of the Indian Railways traffic. We must have dedicated freight corridors, and we are planning towards that.
Railway Minister Piyush Goyal had recently said that he hopes to triple the freight traffic by 2030. So what is the roadmap for that?
Honorable Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal gives us very, very tough targets, and we are very happy with that, because these are challenges. And these are the challenges that we kind of, every time when he comes out with a challenge, the big challenge is given, and we try to work towards that. And yes, he did mention that by about 2030, we should be in a position to triple the traffic. Triple would mean that we should be around 3,300 million tons. And today we are at 1,150. So it's a big challenge, but I'm sure that this can be done, because he is one person, in fact, who also knows where the traffic is. in terms of the only example that I can give you is coal.
Right, of course.
Because as the coal minister, he has indicated that in a couple of years' time, the production of CIL in the entire country would be from 750 million tons now to 1500 million tons. So that automatically gives me about 100 million tons of coal traffic alone.
True.
Yeah. So we should be moving in that direction.
Definitely. Thank you. Moving to the passenger segment, you have yourself said in the past that the demand for AC travel has gone up. So do you expect to introduce more AC three-tier trains in the coming years to cater to that demand?
Yes, when we, the passenger traffic profile is primarily in three segments. One is the suburban traffic,
right.
and roughly around 40 to 45% of our traffic is suburban.
Right.
Very heavily suburban traffic in the metropolitan towns and especially in Mumbai.
Right.
About 70 lakh people every day that
right.
Out of 2.3 crores that we transport.
Right.
Then there is a segment which is non-suburban but non-reserved.
Right.
So it is a mid-section which is hugely in competition with the roadways and the
right.
road sector. Then we have this passenger reservation segment, the reserved passengers, long distance reserved trains.
Right.
And that is where I get my 60% of the passenger revenues
right.
out of the reserved sector. Whereas that is just about 6% of the total number of passengers.
Right.
So we have gained about 1800 crores this year. By way of increasing by about 3% on the reserved sector.
Right.
Within this also, we keep on analyzing the passengers' profile. And we found that there is a preference of the passengers for all kinds of intercity trains for moving in AC 3-tier.
Right.
Now, AC 3-tier is being patronized very well.
Right.
And is the best class that we have. So we have decided to go in for more and more AC 3-tier coaches, which we used to produce about 250. Now we have given orders for production of about 1,000 AC 3-tier coaches every year for the next 3 years.
Okay.
So this will not only be welcomed by the passengers, in fact, who are wanting to travel during winters and during summers. It's a very comfortable coach
right.
and very, very reasonably priced.
Right.
So, and we will also be generating more and more traffic on the PRS segment.
Definitely. So coming from AC 3-tier, so Humsafar Express is a fully AC 3-tier train, and then there are other branded trains that Railways has recently launched. There is the Tejas Express, and in the next few months we'll have Uday, which will be that double-decker train for business travelers. So from an Indian Railways perspective, while you're providing better passenger amenities, what is the business case of launching branded trains?
As you are aware, and you must have seen that before this government, and there used to be a scenario where a large number of constituency-specific projects were sanctioned, and,
yes.
and they were specific to certain states. At the same time, many trains were launched, which were kind of originating from one place to another and
right.
terminating. And this is how it used to happen during the budget times.
Right.
But there has been a paradigm change in this. Now, for the first time, it happened in 2015 when the then railway minister announced and he launched new brands of trains.
No new train per se was announced.
No new trains, but new
yes.
brands of trains. And new brands of trains, this was keeping in view different segments of passengers.
Right.
The train that was introduced, Tejas.
Right.
Now, Tejas was supposed to be an intercity train and improved version of Shatabdis.
Right.
And with very, very different kinds of onboard facilities at a higher speed, and this was meant to cater to that kind of a clientele.
Right.
At the same time, there was this large segment, the middle level segment, intercity travelers again, on a long distance,
right.
who preferred AC 3-tier accommodation.
Right.
So we came up with Humsafar trains. I mean, we are all of the entire rake is AC3,
right.
with very different kinds of facilities inside and onboard facilities, right. including the pantry areas and
it's
automatic.
It's even been upgraded recently.
Yeah. And these are the brand. They are being welcomed by everyone wherever we are launching. There is huge demand for launching of new Humsafar trains. We have launched already 10. 6 more will be launched. Then we have also come up for the common man, I mean, who can't even afford a reserved accommodation,
right.
and has to travel between those two general compartments at the end of the train. We produced new trains called Antodaya.
Right.
This was also another brand of trains which is unreserved, long distance. And these are also being patronized very well.
And then there are those Deen Dayalu coaches as well.
And then Deen Dayalu coaches, which are very, very new coaches, in fact, to take right. care of those passengers who can
Right.
You cannot afford the reserved accommodation, and you must have seen that the conditions they travel in.
Right.
We wanted to improve that, and in that direction was the move to introduce Deen Dayal coaches.
Right. But premium trains like Tejas and Humsafar, are they yielding the expected results? I mean, Humsafar, you yourself said, has got very good
Yes,
demand. What has been the feedback for Tejas?
Tejas, we have introduced only one Tejas, which is
Right.
between Mumbai and Goa. And another train in the same segment, but which was called the earlier Shatabdi, on a higher speed, was Gatiman,
Right.
between Nizamuddin and Agra, where we kind of broke about 160 kilometers record on Indian Railways. But both are being patronized very well. It
Right.
sometimes depends on certain seasonality, because there is a tourist destination
Right.
in Goa. But our pricing, our fares, the time which we are taking compared with the travel by road between Mumbai and Goa, any day. People are preferring that, and we are very happy with the results there. At the same time, we are extremely happy with the results of Humsafar trains, because they are in most of the segments, they are doing 100% plus occupancy.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Sir, so one last question. Over the next few years, what would be the top 5 game-changing moves that Indian Railways is planning to introduce?
Well, as I said, the bigger ones, the game changers would be that we will be having a dedicated freight corridor.
Right.
Not one, in fact, the 2 dedicated freight corridors, Western and Eastern, getting commissioned. And this will bring about a paradigm change in, as I mentioned to you, in terms of unit cost of operation, efficiency, more reliability, better punctuality, to be able to carry more freight traffic on the dedicated freight corridors, and gaining more and more share of not only the loose commodities like coal on the eastern side, but also the containers on the western side.
Right.
That's going to be one big change. Second is, in any case, high-speed rail that
Right.
India is will be having by about 2022, as has been announced by the Honorable Minister, between Ahmedabad and Mumbai.
Right.
So that will be a game changer in terms of how we look at the passenger transportation in this country,
Right.
and perhaps moving in the direction of high-speed transportation, semi-high-speed transportation, both
Right.
200 kilometers and also 320 kilometers. Third, a major decision that has been taken by the Honorable Minister very recently was about completing the electrification works
Right.
of the remaining almost about 30,000 plus kilometers of broad gauge line, which had not been done. And so we were running both the diesel traction trains and electric traction trains,
Right.
having 2 different segments. Production capacities were different with electric locos and diesel locos.
Right.
At the same time, traction changing. So there was no seamlessness of operation.
Right.
So once we electrify the entire route, broad gauge, in about 4 years' time, we will have seamless operation all over the country. And this will again bring about not only the efficiency in operations, but also huge savings in terms of our traction costs.
Right.
Then I see that, infrastructure development in a very
Right.
big way. As I mentioned to you that there has been a decadal neglect over a period of about
Right.
3-4 decades. But we have decided to invest about 8,56,000 crores between 2015 to 2020. And converting it into the expenditure, actual expenditure. I mean, this is no mere plan and no mere
Right.
rhetoric. In fact, this
Right.
time we have started doing it. We have started doing almost about 98,000 crores in the first year, 1,11,000 crores in the second year. The third year is getting completed. It will
Right.
be 1 lakh crore plus of actual investments.
Right.
The railway lines that we used to add earlier varied between 500 to 700 kilometers per year.
Right.
And comparing it with China, it was already doing about 10,000 kilometers. We have already come to a stage of 3,500 kilometers,
That's
2,800 kilometers, 3,500 kilometers, and perhaps again 4,000 and 4,500 kilometers every year.
Right.
So we will be gaining this kind of a thing. This is an augmentation.
Right.
Then 16,000 kilometers of doubling, which is required all over the place wherever we had single lines.
Right.
That doubling has been sanctioned and the works will be completed.
Right.
So we are and then of course the rolling stock, new high horsepower locomotives, and the rolling stock orders we have almost doubled to be able to cater and meet the demands of both the passenger and the freight segments in the years to come. So these are the things that are going to happen and going to bring about a paradigm change in the way railway is looking at, and the growth path. I mean, it's no more than 3%, 4%, 5%. I mean, it has to be 10%, 15%, then only we'll be able to be there.
Right.
And make it the preferred mode of travel. In any case, that's what we want.
Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Indian Railways has traditionally been seen as an ailing transporter, but as Mr. Jamshed himself pointed out, there are a number of game-changing moves in the offing which will make sure that not only Indian Railways but its passengers also see better days ahead. To track all that and more on Indian Railways, don't forget to log on to financialexpress.com.